Alright everyone, welcome to Tales from the 90s. We've had a full month worth of episodes. We're on episode number 31. We're going back to March of 1993. A fourth trip through 1993, and we'll get it started.
Tales from the 90s never die. In our hearts they testify. VCRs and mixtape spins, where every tale begins. Tales from the crypt, marathons, wrestling wars and morning yawns. Play kickball in the street, man those days can't be beat. Tales from the 90s never die.
Last time we were in 1993 was way back episode number 15. We were back in May of that year. But anyway, in March of 1993, I was 9 years old in third grade at Norwood View Elementary. And sorry about the air conditioning in the background, but yeah, I was at Norwood View Elementary. Had just started there a few months ago because we'd moved to Norwood when my mom married my stepdad, the wonderful Marky Foe, which I talked a lot about last week, especially at the end of the episode. If you haven't seen that, go back and watch the end of that episode. I promised the bonus episode is coming. I've been promising it all month. It was supposed to be out at the beginning of the month. It will be out this week because this is the last week of May, and I got another bonus episode for next month. But anyway, it's my top 50 Saturday morning cartoons, or cartoons and shows. The only rules for it are they had to have been on from the time I was born until like 2000 was the time period, and they had to have at least been on the Saturday morning, one of the network shows like, Fox, which would come later in, the early 90s, but NBC, CBS, ABC, later WB, Kids WB. So one of those. So it had to be on one of those. And like I said, just my top 50. It's not going to be everybody's top 50. You might like, why do you got this on the list? But anyway, next month is going to be, because I didn't do one for Mother's Day, I was going to combine it next month. I'm going to be talking about my mom and dad. This is a Mother's Day, Father's Day episode. I think my wife's going to join it, and she's going to be talking about her mom and dad. So that should be a good one. If you don't know me personally, it probably won't be an episode you'll want to catch because it's a bunch of personal stuff and everything. It's not like this. If you've never seen this one before, we do pop culture on here, TV shows, books, video games, sports, wrestling, pretty much anything I want to talk about from the time period. I do a little bit of research just so I can get the facts right, and then go off a lot of memories if I have memories of everything. I try not to talk about too many things I don't have memories of or I don't care about. For instance, like sports, I try not to talk about basketball too much, although I am this week because I do follow March Madness. The only time of year I follow basketball, but you won't ever see me talking about NBA. Like I tried the first couple episodes just because it was part of it, but it's like I don't even care about what I'm talking about. I might mention like if somebody won the NBA Finals in that month or something, but that's about the extent of it. I will be talking about things I do know a lot about, which is wrestling, of course. Huge fan of wrestling, and later on, towards the end of the episode, I'm going to give kind of my beginning days of being a wrestling fan, kind of started in this year. But there was actually no wrestling pay-per-views this month, which is strange. I think it's the first one in all 31 episodes I've done where there hasn't been a wrestling pay-per-view. Of course, WrestleMania was coming in a couple weeks or a week, whatever it was, in April for WrestleMania 9 that year. But like I said, no wrestling pay-per-views, no like what's known as the Super Card, which ECW ran a lot of. Also, WCW Clash of Champions. WWE had Saturday night's main event, which they just had one this past Saturday. It was pretty good. But anyway, some wrestling news of note that month though is there was two tournaments held. ECW held a TV title tournament, which Jimmy Snuka won. He defeated Glenn Osborne to win the vacant title after Osborne had been stripped of the title. And this is kind of the beginning of ECW, still known as Eastern Championship Wrestling, kind of when they started. Nothing like the ECW, if you're familiar with it now and don't know a lot about its history. Nothing like the the ECW you're familiar with, you know, Sandman coming out with the cane, or Sabu and barbed wire and chairs and all that. You know, nothing hardcore about it at this time. Nothing extreme about it at this time. But strangely, WCW also held a World TV title tournament in the same month. Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff won the title. He defeated Eric Watts, and it was he won it on WCW Power Hour, which is one of their syndicated shows. But the title was vacant because Scott Steiner was the champion, but him and his brother both left for WWF for their, I think it was like a year run they had there originally as a tag team. Some other title changes. March 11th, Sting defeated WCW World Champion Big Van Vader for the title, and this was actually on a house show, which wasn't too uncommon then, but nowadays, you know, a world title change at a house show would be huge. I mean, mainly because they don't do many house shows anymore anyway, but that's another subject. I'm not talking about today's wrestling, because this is 90s. But anyway, March 17th, Vader would win it back at another house show. So, you know, back then, their house show, if you don't know wrestling, a house show is basically an untelevised event. They're just called a house show because it's for the house, or other words, the crowd, and that's it. No TV, none of that. And then, you know, you'd have your regular TV shows, and you have your pay-per-views, which are, you know, now known as premium live events. But anyway, on March 2nd, the Hollywood Blondes, stunning Steve Austin and Flying Brian Pillman, one of my favorite tag teams of all time, they defeated WCW World Tag Team Champions Ricky Steamboat and Shane Douglas to win the titles on WCW Worldwide. And then some sad and strange news of note. On March 10th, Dino Bravo, which is he's probably most famous for like his late 80s WWF. I'm talking too fast. Slow it down. I got a lot to cover. WWF run. Dino Bravo, but he died at 44 from multiple gunshots. He was supposed to have they said he had ties to like a criminal organization, kind of like, not the mafia, but sort of something like that in Canada. And he died of some smuggling thing. I don't know exactly, but yeah, definitely not the type of ending I'm sure anybody would have expected for him. But still, not one of my favorite wrestlers of all time for sure, but definitely an interesting character, and one of those just bad guys that they just seem to have a lot of in the WWF throughout history, but definitely in the early 90s, all through the 80s, the 70s, 60s, all back, where the foreign heel would be their biggest bad guy just because he's foreign. It's not like today where they have more character depth and, you know, this person's just a jackass or this person's a piece of crap. That's why we're going to hate him. Back then it was, oh, he's foreign, we hate him. Times have certainly changed. Speaking of that, a show that debuted, which I'm not a fan of, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about, was Beavis and Butthead. This was like one of the big cartoons that like changed the way that cartoons were. I mean, The Simpsons had already started, and they kind of pushed the boundaries there a little bit with some of the stuff they did. But Beavis and the Butthead like went way over, and of course that was the MTV thing. So of course I never watched it, and the few times I've seen it, it's a bunch of laughing idiots, and they sit there on drugs all day laughing at metal music videos I couldn't stand. But for those that do like it, you know, I'm not trying to put it down. It's just the way I viewed it. I'm sure you'd view the same stuff that I like in a different way. But interesting to note that King of the Hill came from this because of, you know, them being from, the characters on that being from Texas and listening to country music, you would think the same people came up with Beavis and Butthead. But you know, King of the Hill. And actually, I think King of the Hill's supposed to come back soon. So hopefully they haven't ruined it the way they ruin everything, it seems, when they bring it back with the so-called new people stuff. Everybody else calls it woke and all this stuff. I don't care about the stupid terms. I always say new people is what I call anybody that's new or anybody from this generation. They're new people. But anyway, yeah, Beavis and Butthead definitely kind of paved the way for South Park, and South Park just went nuts with everything, and then you got all the rip-offs. Family Guy I can't stand. Sorry about that. I'd rather watch Beavis and Butthead than Family Guy. But South Park was first. But even before that was Beavis and Butthead. But anyway, another show that was on at this time, it was in the 4th season, and I can't believe this show's actually still on the air. I didn't even realize that. Unless it's only online, but you wait. You never know these days whether something's actually on TV or if it's just streaming. But I mean, technically it's still on the air, but it's in season 35 now. That's America's Funniest Home Videos. This was back in the day, was always on Sunday nights. It was appointment viewing TV, as the term was, where you made sure to watch this. Of course, nowadays you can either, if you even have cable, you can DVR this stuff, watch it later, or it's on streaming. You can catch it later on streaming. But back in our day, you either sat down and watched this every night, which I believe it was on either 7 or 8 on ABC. But either you sat down and watched it, or you were recording it on the VCR. It was one of the greatest things they came out with the VCR, when you can schedule to record things. But yeah, this, if you've never seen America's Funniest Home Videos, never heard of it, I mean, you had to have been living under a rock, because like I said, it's been on forever, throughout the time I was a kid till now. The original host was Bob Saget, rest in peace. Of course, most known as the dad on Family, where did I get Family? Full House. I was going to say Family Matters, or Family Ties. Started with an F, Full House. Anyway, he was doing that and this at the same time. Sort of like when Drew Carey was hosting, had his own show, and Whose Line Is It Anyway? He was like the big TV star. At this time, it was Bob Saget, and this show was hilarious. Nowadays, you can watch. I can't. Like I said, I can't believe they still have it on, because nowadays you can watch people be idiots online, home videos, because back then you had to have a camera. You had to have a little bit of money to get a camera. Nowadays, anybody with a phone can record anything. But back then, you had to record this stuff. You had to catch something funny actually happen on camera, and then send it into them. And they would have prizes on each show, and at the end of the season, they'd have like a, bring all the winners and show all the funniest ones, and then crown like one champion of the season. But you'd see all kinds of stuff. People falling down, people saying stupid stuff, all kinds of stuff. Of course, it was network TV, so it was censored. Now you can find people cussing and all kinds of stuff on YouTube. But yeah, America's Funniest Home Videos was definitely ahead of its time. It was, I don't know if you'd classify it as a reality show. I wouldn't really call it a game show either, even though there was like winners picked. But I don't know, I guess it was, I don't know, kind of its own category. I guess it was a reality show because it was real people. But and the theme song to that, just iconic and close. There's been several hosts. I think Tom Bergeron, I think is his name, is the one that hosted it the longest. I think it's being hosted now by Alfonso Riviera, if I'm saying his last name right. Ribeiro, sorry, I think it's Ribeiro. The guy that played Carlton on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. He's been hosting it for a few years now. But, yeah, America's Funniest Home Videos. I always wished I had a camera anyway, because, as if you can't tell, I love cameras. But, it goes back to my grandpa Wally. If you check out any of my home videos on the channels from back then, he had this, the big camera that sits on your shoulders like this long, and, it had a full videotape before they came out with the smaller ones. The full VHS tape fits in it. And just, ever since then I've been in love with cameras, video cameras. I always say my two loves are music and wrestling, but if I had to qualify a third of like a thing to love, I'm not talking about people or anything, I guess it would be video cameras and making videos and all kinds of stuff. Probably, and it's incorporated in what I do in wrestling. Well, not as much anymore, but definitely with this now. But anyway, we'll move on to sports. Baseball was getting ready to start, but hadn't started the season yet. But like I said, the only time I ever watched basketball is March Madness, just to see my teams. My favorite team is Ohio State, but my two other teams are UC, University of Cincinnati, and Xavier, which was right on the outskirts or in, I can't remember if it was in the city limits of Norwood or just right past. It might have been right past it, but it was close. Anyway, it was closer than UC. Xavier College. I think they were the Musketeers. UC was the Bearcats. But during this time, UC had a really good team, and so did Xavier. And UC actually made it to the Great Eight, which was the last 8. It was, of course, if you don't know March Madness, it's a basketball tournament, a Division I, which is the best schools. And they start out with 64 teams. Well, now I think it's 68 now? I think they have like a few play-in games or something like that. But anyway, the actual tournament is 64 teams. But UC made it to the final 8. They defeated Coppin State, which I've never heard of, New Mexico State, and Virginia, and then they got defeated by North Carolina in overtime. So they were real close to making it to the Final Four. But the other team, Xavier, they defeated New Orleans in the first round, but then they lost to Indiana by 3 points in the round of 32, which is the second round. And my favorite team, Ohio State, didn't make the tournament. But a funny thing, Michigan actually made it all the way to the finals and lost to North Carolina in the championship game. And people are like, oh, why are you so happy about Michigan? Because if you know anything about the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry, you know that Ohio State fans hate Michigan fans and vice versa. But big surprise here, all of Michigan's wins have been stricken from the record because of the scandal with, what was his name, Chris Webber. He was deemed ineligible because they found out he was being paid money by boosters to go to Michigan. So all their wins got wiped off. Cheaters. That's all Michigan seems to be known for, is a bunch of freaking cheaters. But anyway, if any Michigan fans are watching this, I'm sure I've lost subscribers on that one, but I don't care. Michigan sucks. I'm gonna have to show you on camera. I got a hat. I found a Michigan hat at, I think, Goodwill or somewhere like that. But I decorated this hat. It says Michigan sucks. It's got all kinds of stuff. I'm gonna have to wear that. I haven't worn it the last couple of years, but I need to wear it. Maybe that's why Michigan's beaten Ohio State the last couple of years. And they like to brag, yeah, they beat us, but guess who won the national championship? Anyway, I'm going to have to wear that Michigan hat. The next time I'm talking about Michigan or Ohio State in a video, I'm going to wear that hat. Or at least put it on. But NASCAR, which I just watched last night, the Coca-Cola 600, my driver, William Byron, finished second, but led most of the race. Thought he was going to win, but couldn't pull it off in the end. Anyway, at this time, Davey Allison won the Pontiac Excitement 400 from Richmond. Morgan Shepherd, which I'm not very familiar with that name, won the Motorcraft Quality Parts 500 at Atlanta Motor Speedway. And then Dale Earnhardt won the Trans-South 500 at Darlington. And of course, this is the year Dale won his 6th championship. And he'd go on to win his 7th and final one next year, back-to-back. But I wasn't watching NASCAR at the time. But I became a fan probably the late 90s, early 2000s, and it's fun to go back and look at all the history. I know a lot of people get on people for, oh, you haven't been a fan for life, so who cares? You come upon something at some point in your life, just like with Ohio State. I wasn't a fan until very early 2000s, but that doesn't mean that, if you're one of those people that, I'm getting off on a tangent here, if you're one of the people that, don't stick with a team, or you only pick the teams that seem to win, that's the fair weather fans that they always talk about. I pick a team and I stick with it. Trust me, I'm a Reds and a Bengals fan. We ain't had much to celebrate, besides the Bengals going to the Super Bowl a couple years ago. We ain't had much to celebrate. Reds last won the World Series in 1990, okay? I don't flip and flop, and like with basketball and NASCAR, I may have came into it as a late teen, early adult, but, that's just when I came into it. It doesn't mean that I'm, any less of a fan anyway. That tangent over. One other news of note in the sports world is I'm not a big fan of NHL, so I won't be talking about them, but on March 1st, Anaheim, California got a expansion team, which is what they call teams that join a league. They do it in baseball and NFL too. But anyway, they got an expansion team, and it was the Mighty Ducks, of course, based on the Disney movie, because I think Disney owned the team. If I'm wrong, I'm not sure. But they are in Anaheim, California, where Disney was headquartered, or is headquartered, I think. One of them, anyway. That's where Disneyland is. But, yeah, the Mighty Ducks, and interesting enough, I don't remember the league, but in Cincinnati, we had a minor league hockey team known as the Cincinnati Mighty Ducks that played at the Cincinnati Gardens, which sadly no longer exists anymore. It was always fun. We didn't get to do it much as kids, but as an adult, I got to go to the Cincinnati Gardens, actually walk down there, and which is kind of a dangerous part of the neighborhood, so wasn't advised. But yeah, go see Mighty Ducks games. Also go to see the Cincinnati Cyclones games downtown at Old Riverfront Coliseum, which I can't even remember what it's called now. It's been U.S. Bank Arena, the Crown, different names, but the big arena downtown in Cincinnati. The Cyclones were a minor league team too, just in a different league. But because the teams never played each other. But yeah, it's hockey and basketball is one of them things. Like, I'll go watch them. If I probably won't pay money for it, but if somebody gave me the tickets or something. But I really don't care to watch it on TV. Outside of like college basketball. But another thing on this podcast I try to do is talk about some toys of my childhood. And, I've talked about a whole bunch. I've done a whole episode on favorite toys with my wife. One of the first bonus episodes I had. But it's hard to find information about toys as far as like when they came out, the exact time. Because that's what I try to do is on the podcast. I sound like I'm from Minnesota all of a sudden. On the podcast is try to talk about toys that, stuff that came out during the time period. That's why if I'm talking about, for instance, if I'm talking about music, I'll talk about the number ones that month. Or TV shows, I try to make sure they're on at that time, not, something that happened later in the year. Because otherwise, why break it down by months and just do one on the year? Which I'd be here rambling for 4 or 5 hours if I did that. But anyway, I found a page that lists like all the McDonald's Happy Meal toys of all time, and everybody remembers Happy Meal toys. I mean, they're still a thing, but it just something special about them in the 90s. And it wasn't just McDonald's. I mean, Burger King had their own toys. Even I think Pizza Hut was doing toys then. Taco Bell was. But there's no like listed information about them, so if I'm gonna talk about them in one, it'll just be like a general, I remember this. I've talked before about getting the Dick Tracy watch from the movie Dick Tracy from Burger King, and it made sounds, but I would literally thought it would like let me talk to people. It's crazy. I still think it's crazy to think that we have like the iWatch or whatever, an Apple Watch. I'm gonna go iWatch. What the. Well, Apple called everything so, but then, the Apple Watch and, the smart watches that they have now, you can actually talk to people on that we thought was so futuristic then. But anyway, I found the McDonald's Happy Meal toys that came out in March of 93, and the first collection was Dinosaur toys from the TV show, which I'll be talking about them a little bit later in the TGIF lineup. But, they had the characters in these, in this particular set, you'd push a button and there was like a string attached and something would move or something like that. Like the most famous character from Dinosaurs is always, not the mama, Baby Sinclair. He's holding a pan, and if you push the button, the string moves, and it's like he's banging his pan so you can bang the pan against his dad's head. But I actually, just looking it up, found a complete set of these still in the packages, not even opened, on eBay, a full set for $25. I was surprised because I thought that stuff goes for a lot more. So if anybody out there wants a full set of March 1993 dinosaur toys, look it up on eBay. It's only $25 and it's buy now. It's not even the starting bid. Seriously, if you're a collector, snatch those up because they're, like I said, original packages. And then they had one called Food Fundamentals, which were like a food item toy that kind of transformed into something else. Like some that looked like apples and steaks. Like, I don't know what they were doing with that. Like, I remember the classic ones with like the burger and the shake and the fries and stuff. But these were just like like they don't have steaks and apples at McDonald's. I mean, they have that. I think they have apple slices now, but that was a weird one. But yeah, McDonald's is definitely known as the leader of. I don't know why that got blurry all of a sudden. The leader of the Happy Meal toys or the kids' meal toys. You know, you'd be getting that more for the toy than anything. But you know, let me know in your comments your favorite kids' meal, Happy Meal, whatever toy ever, if you like have one, or favorite lineup, or just some memories you have of that. And we're gonna move on to talk about some music. I always repeat myself just in case people haven't watched this before, but my favorite music is country music. Didn't listen to pop music at all, but I will give the number ones for that, just to give some, you know, in case that is some people's favorite. Going off the Billboard Hot 100, A Whole New World by, I don't know if I'm saying this right, Peebo, Bryson, and Regina Bell. I don't recognize those names, but I know the song because it came from the Aladdin movie. Classic, obviously. But I didn't realize that song was released as a single and went to number one. That's pretty cool. And then a song I'd never heard of, and a band, I guess, I'd never heard of, called Informer by Snow. They went number one for the last 3 weeks in March, and then for all of April, for 7 weeks total. And I'd never heard of this song or band before. So, and I've listened to a lot of pop music, you know, even from that time period since then, but I've never heard of the band Snow. I'm guessing it's a band because it's one word, and it's not a name. And the song Informer, I don't know. But anyway, American Country Countdown is what I listen to every Sunday morning with Bob Kingsley from 9 to noon, usually taping it. They count down the top 40 songs. Number one for 2 weeks, and then also 1 week back in February, so 3 weeks total, was Lori Morgan's What Part I Know. That's a classic song. I love that song. And then also coming in at number one for a week that month was Heartland by George Strait. That was I think it was his first single from the Pure Country soundtrack, which was that movie that George Strait was in, Pure Country. Love that movie. My dogs love it too, apparently. I believe Heartland was his first song. I know the big song from it was I Cross My Heart, which was number one for multiple weeks. But I don't know. For some reason in my head, I'm thinking Heartland was the very first single. And then Clint Black's When My Ship Comes In was number one for... sorry, my brain froze there. It was number one, and then it was also number one for a week in April, so 2 weeks. But When My Ship Comes In, Clint Black, that one's a good song. Sorry, I don't know why my brain went blank there. I was trying to figure out the math there. But yeah, definitely a different country. You always get a bunch of different number ones unless it's a massive song. Like the Lori Morgan song was basically her telling, you know, this guy keeps asking her to dance, and, you know, you want me to buy you a drink, and she's like, no, what part of no don't you understand? Heartland was by George Strait was just, you know, all about singing the song about the Heartland. You know, it was basically the very first song you hear in the movie. Kind of kicks it off. It's a fast-paced song for George Strait, but it's really good. And then When My Ship Comes In is just Clint Black singing, you know, it won't be long till my ship comes in, basically saying, you know, soon things are going to turn around for me. Just great songs. I got them all on CD, computer, whatever else you want. I'm old school. I will listen to streaming, but I got all my CDs on my computer. I think my thing said I've got like over a month's worth of music. If I played it constantly, you wouldn't hear the same song twice over a month. Which I frequently, you know, just let my music play on random. But anyway, a few albums were released this month. A couple big ones. The first one that was released by Dwight Yoakam was This Time. It was his fifth studio album. It went to number 4 on the charts. And 3 of his singles just barely missed the top spot. They went to number 2. Ain't That Lonely Yet. Love that one. 1,000 Miles from Nowhere and Fast as You. Because that was that period of the early 90s when, you know, Dwight was like really going, you know, massive songs. But all the songs missed number 1 somehow. I don't know how. But Tracy Lawrence released Alibis, his second album. and it's my personal favorite of his. Like every song on this, you have some CDs you get, albums, whatever you want to call them. There's certain artists or certain albums that you do not skip one single song on. Now, some of them aren't. Some have a couple songs like, I don't know if I care about this. But this one, not one gets skipped by me. It was certified platinum and made it to number 5 on the Billboard country charts. All 4 singles released from the album went to number 1. The title track, of course, Alibis, is probably the most well-known from it. Can't Break It to My Heart, which is my second. I'm getting ahead of myself. Can't Break It to My Heart is my favorite song from the album. My second, Home, which is where I got second from, and If the Good Die Young. Like, all 4 of those went to number 1. I couldn't pick my favorite album track, the songs that didn't release as a single. I got a tie between 2. We Don't Love Here Anymore and It Only Takes One Bar to Make a Prison. Both those classic, heartbreaking type country songs that I absolutely adore. And final album released this month was Sammy Kershaw's Haunted Heart. Also his second album. It was certified platinum as well. It had 4 singles that was released off it also. Only one went to number 1, which was She Don't Know She's Beautiful. That was, might have been a career song for him. Not my favorite song of his. My favorite song of his is Yard Sale from his first album, but She Don't Know She's Beautiful is probably his most well-known song. And then other songs released, the other 3 songs released went to the top 10. The title track, Haunted Heart, Queen of My Double Wide Trailer, which is probably another one of his most well-known songs. Fun fact, if you didn't know, the part in the song, The Queen of My Double Wide Trailer, where he mentions basically his trailer park romance, where his woman's running away with this guy named Earl. He's like, what does he call him? The Charlie Daniels of the torque wrench. But anyway, she runs away with him. Fun fact is that Earl from that song is the same Earl from Goodbye Earl, the Dixie Chicks song, where he's like an abusive guy that like they kill, because it was written by the same guy and he's stated this basically the same guy. So this is the first part of a 2-part song. I didn't even realize it. But anyway, the other song that went to went to the top 10 was I Can't Reach Her Anymore. I don't have the album, but one song from the album I do know is Still Lovin' You, and it was because it was actually on his Greatest Hits album, which came out obviously later, but it made the Greatest Hits album even though it wasn't released as a single. I guess he liked it so much, and it's a really good song. It's, I believe the only instrument it has, I don't know what I'm saying. I thought the only instrument was guitar, but that's just like the first half of the song. Anyway, I'm half asleep here. I've been weed eating all day. I've been making... I actually recorded a song. More of that later on. Original song I wrote. I've been doing all kinds. My karaoke videos. I'm half asleep. I don't know what I'm saying. We'll move on to movies. Only one movie released this month that I seen or liked was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3. And of course, this is always the controversial one where people either seem to love this movie or hate it. It's the one that was released in the line of the 90s Turtles movies, which is, 1, 2, and 3, basically. The first one's a classic. The second one, Secret of the Ooze, is also a classic. The third one gets, a lot of people don't like it because it's the one where they go back in time to, like, Japan. It's where they find that April finds a scepter and ends up going to Japan in place of, I can't remember what his name was, but... Anyway, in place of this guy from Japan, and the Turtles end up going, and just, it's a lot of craziness. A lot of people hate it. I like it. Definitely not as good as the first 2, so it would be third in my list of those movies. But I still think it has a lot of that 90s Turtles charm to it. It's just, they tried to do something different. At least they didn't go to space, which would actually not be, like, too far-fetched as far as, like, Turtles. When they put horror movies in space is completely dumb. But if the Turtles actually would have went to space, I could have seen that. Like, of course, the Turtles cartoon and the movie is different. Krang and the Technodrome and Dimension X were in the cartoon, but they could have easily brought those into the 90s Turtles movies with Shredder and then had it go into space or something. But anyway, the going back in a time, and a lot of people didn't like it, of course, because it didn't have Shredder in it or any of the classic villains. It was just like ninjas they were fighting in, you know, ancient Japan. But, you know, I give them, you know, credit for thinking outside the box and trying to do something different, so they wasn't the same movie in New York with the, you know, the same type villains. They were trying something different because they didn't want. Because if they would have came out with that, then people probably would have been like, "Oh, we're getting tired of this." You know, you can't please people. You know how that goes. We're gonna move into our TV lineups part of this. I've got 3 actually this week. We got the Saturday morning cartoons lineup from March 6th. Nickelodeon's lineup also from March 6th, and then TGIF for the month. We'll start with the Saturday morning cartoons, and I'm gonna actually have the lineups on here. But this is I put in a random date, and it came up with oh, shut up about ad blocker. Came up with March 6th of 1993, so it would have been the first Saturday of the month. We start on ABC, A Pup Named Scooby-Doo. Of course, this is not Scrappy-Doo, his nephew, but this was like Scooby-Doo when he was a puppy and Shaggy was younger. And then we've got West Coast Cow, Boys of Moo Mesa. I've seen that on here before, but I don't remember it at all. And then Goof Troop, everybody remembers Goof Troop. The Addams Family cartoon, the original one from the early 90s, late 80s, I believe. Well, I shouldn't say also, but it definitely, some of these are going to be on my top 50 Saturday morning cartoons / shows. Had to put / shows because obviously if you're just limiting to cartoons, then I don't get to include the Power Rangers, which I have to include the Power Rangers in my top 50. Just, I'm not going to give away my number 1 or anything, but just look for that later this week. But the Bugs Bunny and Tweety show, that's a running gag on here, is how many different variations of Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies and Bugs Bunny can we fit in a lineup? But Schoolhouse, okay, for 4 minutes, from 10:56 to 11, Schoolhouse Rock. If you remember those, they were like little shorts. I first seen them at school. I never seen them on TV, or if I did, since they were so short, I didn't even recognize it. Maybe I thought it was a commercial, but it would always be some kind of like learning thing. And then at 11, Land of the Lost, the 1991 series. Didn't care for the 70s one, but loved Land of the Lost from 1991. First saw that on Nickelodeon. It's on my top 50 Nickelodeon shows list. And then 11:30, Darkwing Duck. I don't have a lot of memories of that. I didn't watch it all that much. And then at noon, we had the New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, which I've never watched. And then CBS, we've got Fievel's American Tales, which I remember a little bit. Don't remember too much about them. Then we've got The Little Mermaid, of course, that on CBS. This is before ABC and Disney merged, so they were you could still find Disney cartoons on CBS. Then we've got an hour of Garfield and Friends, one of the quintessential Saturday morning cartoons. Love both parts of it, the Garfield part and his friends on the farm. And then for an hour, speaking of that, we've got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the cartoon, which I just talked about the movie. Which debuted in 1987, but can't go along with the Turtles cartoon. I've got the whole set on DVD. Haven't even started watching them yet, but can't wait to get into that. Back to the Future cartoon, I've never watched. Raw Tunage, never seen that. The Amazing Live Sea Monkeys. Oh no, I was watching a cartoon. I might still be watching it. I can't remember if I finished it. But if you look up on YouTube, you can find these like cartoon blocks from back then. I believe it was 1994 is when I was looking, because I was just doing, I did 94 last week, so that's what I looked up to watch. But you can find, full cartoon blocks with commercials. But I seen a preview for this show, this cartoon, The Amazing Live Sea Monkeys. If you remember those, they were like the sea monkeys you grow, and they were just like the little something shrimp or something. But anyway, these are hideous looking things. I gotta check out this cartoon and watch it. Anyway, then we've got Grimmy, which I don't even know what that is. Grimmy. But early days of Fox Kids here. We've got Dog City at 8. I've never heard of that. 8:30, one of the original Fox Kids cartoons, Bobby's World. Love that. Tom and Jerry Kids, which of course, the Tom and Jerry is kids. Eek the Cat, which is, I know, a staple of Fox Kids, but I never watched it. Don't shoot me. Tiny Toon Adventures. Speaking of Tiny, I'm petting my dog Tiny down here. You want to come and say hi, Tiny? There's Tiny. He's on the Tiny Toon Adventures. Oh, now Tails is getting jealous. Quit. I opened up a wormhole there. But Tiny Toon Adventures, can't go wrong with that. And then Tasmania, which I always remember watching at like 3 in the afternoon when I was a kid. It was when it came on. But it was a Saturday morning cartoon too, and I watched that a lot. X-Men, the animated series. Didn't care for any of the movies. I'm not a superhero movie type person, but I loved X-Men, the series, the cartoon series. And then Super Dave, Daredevil for Hire. I know it was based on the Super Dave wacky character, but I never really watched that. And then NBC, which is known as TNBC, Teen NBC, had at 9 o'clock Saved by the Bell. Love that show. And then California Dreams, which I'd never seen. Saved by the Bell again. Name Your Adventure, which I've looked up but never seen. And then NBA Inside the Stuff. Yeah, I was not a big NBC morning person. In fact, my only time I've seen Saved by the Bell was like syndication afternoons, so I never even watched it in the mornings. But yeah, that's our network TV Saturday morning cartoon lineup. We're going to go to our Nickelodeon lineup next, which of course starts, these start at midnight and go to midnight. So of course we're going to get Nick at Night first. It starts with Get Smart, which I've seen a few episodes of. Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, never seen, along with the Patty Duke Show, the Donna Reed Show, Fernwood Tonight, Mary Tyler Moore Show, Dick Van Dyke Show. Then we get to the Lucy Show, which I've seen a few times, and Dragnet as well. And then 4:30 in the morning we get Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which as a kid, if I woke up watching that would freak me out at the time, because I know it's not scary by today's standards, but Alfred Hitchcock could do horror, even in the TV show format. Then at 5 we got The Adventures of Superman, the classic Superman black and white show. Many Loves of Dobie Gillis again. Then at 6 we start with Kids Court, which I don't remember seeing a lot, but I'm pretty sure it's like the People's Court of the time, but just involving kids. Then we get The Little Bits, which I've never seen. Did I say bitch? I meant bits. Join us on Nickelodeon to watch The Little Bitch. Sorry. Was not meaning to cuss, especially during a Nickelodeon lineup, but that came out. The Little Bits. Then at 7, one of my all-time favorite Nickelodeon shows, Eureka's Castle. Moving on here. Love Eureka's Castle. 7:30 Lassie. Love that too. They're still showing that on Nickelodeon from the 50s and 60s. 8, one of the original Nicktoons, Doug. 8:30, another one of the original Nicktoons, Rugrats. And then we got an hour of Muppet Babies. You people are going to shoot me one of these days for doing the annoying way that I say that because of the theme song. Then at 10, we got Heathcliff, which everybody always... Heathcliff and Garfield, the orange cats of the Saturday morning cartoon. I actually preferred Heathcliff a little bit more, but they're both really good. And then we got Nickelodeon's Most Wanted, Yogi Bear, which was just their way of showing Yogi Bear. I don't know why they had to call it Nickelodeon's Most Wanted. They couldn't just call it Yogi Bear. I mean, they didn't rename like Nickelodeon Muppet Babies. But then we've got an hour of You Can't Do That on Television, classic skit show, precursor to all that on Nickelodeon. It's where the Nickelodeon sign came from. It was one of the very first Nickelodeon shows, actually. Then we've got an hour of Dennis the Menace cartoon from the 80s. I love that cartoon. Then we got Nick News, which I was normally not watching. Beyond Belief, which I've looked this up before. It's not the Beyond Belief you're probably thinking of. Beyond Belief Fact or Fiction, where they give you the stories and you got to guess whether it's true or not. It's something else. I can't remember exactly what it is. Then it looks like they showed a movie, Peter of Placid Forest, which I don't remember at all. Then Grimm's Fairy Tale Classics. Barely remember that. Then we got another You Can't Do That on Television. And then we've got started a game show here. I was going to say game shows, but there's one in the middle that's not a game show. But anyway, Get the Picture, hosted by Mike O'Malley, which mostly known from Nickelodeon Guts. But this was like a thing where you had to guess like a puzzle based on the video screens. It was a really good game show. Next is Welcome Freshman, which I never watched. 5:30, Salute Your Shorts. Love that one. The summer camp and the kids at it. That one and Hey Dude were some of my favorite teen shows, I guess you'd call them, from Nickelodeon. Then we got Family Double Dare, my favorite version of Double Dare. Loved Family Double Dare. Just everything about it. The question and answer, the physical challenges, the obstacle course. Loved it all. And Nickelodeon Guts, which is the original one, which is just 3 kids. They'd have Global Guts later on, which would become, I think, even more popular, where they would have 3 kids from different countries in the world. But this was just basically everybody from America. And then Doug again, Rugrats, and then we got Snick, because it's Saturday night, of course. Clarissa Explains It All, Melissa Joan Hart's first series. Love that show. Then we got Roundhouse, which I don't have too many memories of, but I did watch it a little bit. Then we got the Ren and Stimpy Show, which was one of those 3 original Nicktoons with Doug and Rugrats. But by this time they moved it to nighttime, probably because they were getting too many complaints from parents having this on during the day. And then finished the night off with Are You Afraid of the Dark? Which this episode for this week was The Tale of the Captured Souls, which Are You Afraid of the Dark was my #1 Nickelodeon show of all time. Can't say enough about that. I love Are You Afraid of the Dark. Great way to finish your night off on Nickelodeon with Snick. And then it says for Nick at Night, the rest of the night was The Chairman's Choice. I don't know. Are they talking about the chairman as like they call Frank Sinatra? Or the chairman of Nickelodeon? I don't know. I don't remember this. But apparently it was The Chairman's Choice, so they just put on whatever they wanted on Nick at Night for the rest of the night. But anyway, that's a Nickelodeon lineup. And we got one more TV lineup to really go through. And not like episode by episode, but just what was on at the time on TGIF, which was let's see, Family Matters was in season 4, and 2 episodes this month were a couple big ones. One was the final appearance of the daughter Judy, which just disappeared. After she quit the show, they never even mentioned her. It's like where's she been? And another one is where Laura's best friend Maxine ends up getting together with her brother Eddie's best friend Waldo. Kind of like an odd couple. Maxine's kind of like this popular girl, not like popular to the point like she thinks she's better than everybody else. She's just popular. And Waldo's an idiot of the show, even worse than Urkel, I think. But they get together, an unlikely couple. And then Step by Step was in its 2nd season. And then we've got season 3 of Dinosaurs, which is you're talking about them earlier with the toys. And then a show called Where I Live, which I've never heard of, was in its 1st season, and they lasted 2 seasons, but I never heard of it. It was created by Michael Jacobs, who did Boy Meets World, which would Boy Meets World would actually start on TGIF that year later on in the fall when the next season started. A little bit of news. If anybody remembers, in the Northeast area, I'm from Norwood, Ohio, which is Cincinnati, basically. We're a suburb of Cincinnati. If that anybody doesn't know where I'm from, that kind of puts it in perspective. Anybody remember the blizzard, which was called the Storm of the Century back on March 13th of 1993? We got over a foot of snow. Some places got almost 20 inches. I think New York got hit really hard. It wasn't Cincinnati's biggest winter storm. I think that was in '78. I think that was back when the Ohio River froze and you could walk, and there were people ice skating on the Ohio River. But yeah, I had over a foot of snow. I think even school got canceled a little bit for us then, which is rare for us because our whole school system didn't have a bus system at all. You walked, and it was a mile from my house. Well, not this time. I was in elementary school, but when I went to middle school and high school, it was over a mile to get to school. The over a mile uphill both ways, that whole thing. That was literally, we went up, down a hill, up a hill, going both ways, going home. But anyway, yeah, we hardly ever got school canceled because we didn't have buses, because people were expected to just walk or their parents bring them. It's not that far. It wasn't like where I live now in an almost rural area. Rural, I can't ever say that word right. Rural, I ain't gonna try no more. Anyway, where there's a lot of county roads and gravel roads where a lot of them don't get plowed. It's not uncommon for a couple inches of snow to make school out all week. But in our school we hardly ever got canceled, so we had 2 or 3 days canceled so that's how you know it was a big storm. But yeah, it was called the storm of the century, but I don't know if it was, it wasn't Cincinnati's biggest storm of the century. I don't know about New York. Like I said, some places got on. But talking about Goosebumps now, that Goosebumps was still in its early stages, but they took off like a rocket. Thanks to Scholastic Book Fairs, for sure, because they're the ones that really put R.L. Stein's books out, and then they just became huge. But they were only on book number 6 at this time, and it was Let's Get Invisible. That's a classic one. Of course, it was on. It made the Goosebumps TV series on Fox 3 years later in '96. I believe it was season 2, episode 13. Yeah, that's what it was. I typed that wrong, but yeah, season 2, episode 13. Let's Get Invisible. Just a couple more things to talk about now. Let's see how long. 51 minutes, not too long. So some of these have been really long. Talk about video games. It seems the earlier 90s has a better record of like the top video games of the month than the later 90s. They didn't really, I guess, whatever was keeping track of that didn't keep track of it anymore. But anyway, the top selling video games broken down by each system for March. The NES, original Nintendo, was still going strong. Most of the games were starting to come out on Super Nintendo, but they still had games released. Like the number 1 game was Tecmo NBA Basketball. And a lot of the number 1 games for Nintendo at the time were like the one that was a few months before this was the Tecmo Bowl for football, because a lot of the sports games would continue on NES longer than any other games, while the adventure games and stuff were being put out on the newer systems. You have more graphics, you can do more. Nintendo was 8-bit graphics, Super Nintendo doubled that was 16. But the number 1 game for Super Nintendo was Star Fox. That's of course a classic game. Star Fox 64 on Nintendo 64, equally as popular. Sega Genesis's biggest game was Street Fighter 2. That was a classic one. Sega CD, which was their, when they started getting too stupid, I think, with Sega, when they started releasing, the Sega CD and the 32X and all these add-ons, and they were trying to get stuff out and trying to beat Nintendo when they didn't really have to put out new stuff. Just keep the games coming for Sega Genesis. Anyway, Sega CD's number 1 game was a game I've never heard of, and I thought it was talking about the Jaguar game system, but apparently there's a game called Jaguar XJ220. I'd have no idea what that game is about. But the handhelds were going strong at the time too. Game Boy for Nintendo's number 1 game was Super Mario Land 2, and then Sega Game Gear. Nintendo Game Boy is kind of like this little square. It's kind of like this. The Game Gear is kind of like spread out with a screen in the middle. Sort of like what I'm not comparing it to the Switch, but sort of kind of like that, a wider one, when the Game Boy was kind of just like a little rectangle. Anyway, Sega Game Gear game was Streets of Rage, which I've played the Genesis version of that, but I've never played the Game Gear version. And then one game release of note this month was Kirby's Adventure. It was the second ever Kirby game. It was released on NES. Don't know if it was released. It was probably released Super Nintendo later, I would imagine. I don't think they'd come out with a game like, one of their platform games for, Nintendo and not Super Nintendo. But if I'm wrong, let me know. But it was the first game to introduce, second Kirby's game, but the first one that introduced his ability where he would eat the enemies and he would gain their powers, which would become a staple of that franchise. But I want to wind up the podcast by talking about, really, like I was saying earlier, about my love of wrestling really starting this year. We actually had cable, so we were able to catch the... I wasn't watching the WWF show. I wasn't watching wrestling at night. And I guess we kept it more on TBS than USA. Because for some reason, I don't remember watching WWF for a long time. But I was watching WCW's Saturday night. That was their big show at the time. You got to remember, if you're used to the Monday Night Wars and all that, Nitro being their big show. 1993, their big show was WCW Saturday night on TBS from 6:05 to 8:05. If you remember TBS, they always started things at the 05 instead of, I don't know what the reasoning behind that was. Maybe giving people a chance to finish what they're watching on another channel and then time to flip over. I don't know, but it always started at the 05, not 00. But anyway, yeah, 6:05 to 8:05 Eastern on Saturday night. You get WCW Saturday night, and then various shows on Sunday. Worldwide, the Power Hour, Main Event. Just syndication shows. But that's when I really discovered WCW. It'd be a Saturday. And they'd even have syndication shows during Saturday mornings too. Saturday mornings, Sunday night, and Saturday night. Like I said, this is before Monday Nitro, so there was no weekday shows. The only shows you get during the week is when they would do their Clash of the Champions, which was shown on TBS and not a pay-per-view. And those were huge events. I remember watching those like, wow, this is pretty cool. This is almost like a pay-per-view, which we never got to get, obviously. But I'd be watching WCW, and they'd always show the Mark Martin Valvoline car, which was, a sponsor of them. Valvoline was a huge sponsor of WCW. This is before WCW got their car. So there'd be a NASCAR report during WCW as part of their sponsorship with Valvoline. Hear how Mark Martin did. So he was the first name I had ever heard of in NASCAR. But I started getting wrestling magazines, and I've told the story before. I'm not proud to say that I stole more than a few wrestling magazines. The first ones I got, I actually bought with money that I found from Marky Foe. So I guess technically I never bought one with my own money until I became an adult. Anyway, I'd first gotten, because I was watching WCW and I happened to see it, UDF WCW magazine. I was like, wow, they got their own magazine, and it was pretty cool. And of course, you don't realize as a kid, it's all written from WCW's perspective. It's not like some news thing. But, I didn't care about any of that. I wasn't caring about journalism or, And in that time period, I still thought wrestling was, completely legitimate, I won't go into any of that, but, you know how you are as a kid. But, love the posters in the magazines and all the pay-per-view results, because you didn't get to watch the pay-per-views. They'd show a couple highlights here and there on WCW Saturday night or the syndicated shows, but you get to read the full results, and there'd be biographies, and of course you don't realize they're made up stuff. You think what you're reading is oh, I didn't know this person did this as a kid, and some of it might have been true, but I'm sure a lot of it was made up. But it was while checking out that I first saw the PWI magazine, Pro Wrestling Illustrated. And that thing changed my whole wrestling life. I found out I'd known about the WWF, because my very first memory of wrestling, I remember I got a home video of me watching it on my 3rd birthday party, but obviously I don't remember that. Have actual memories other than watching the memories. That's not really, if you're watching something but can't remember it in your head, it's not really a memory. But my first memory of ever seeing it is, I remember seeing Sergeant Slaughter in the Royal Rumble, it was prior to this, when we were living in Mount Carmel, before we were with Marky Foe. My mom like flipped into the channel and it was on. And in those days, and sometimes I found out later on, sometimes the pay-per-views would just play and you don't even have to order them. Sometimes it'd just be a mistake. So that had to have been what happened, because I know my mom didn't order Royal Rumble and watching it because she wasn't a wrestling fan. But I remember, so I knew WWF, by name, but never really watched any of their shows. But I started learning about it all through PWI magazine and all these, I didn't realize that wrestling was such a huge thing. I'm sure ECW was in there, but I wasn't paying attention because it was Eastern Championship Wrestling, so they probably didn't get much mentioned. But, I didn't realize that there was wrestling companies in Japan and Mexico and over in Europe and all this stuff. And they were saying different stuff than WCW magazines, so I started getting in my head like maybe the WCW magazines, like some of the stuff's made up, but the PWI's got the real stories. Which is really funny if you know PWI magazine, where they pretend they talk to wrestlers, and I'm sure they probably have a few times like actual interviews with wrestlers, but a lot of it they just made up the stories. But they have rankings, and that PWI 500, the first time I seen that, the rankings of the wrestlers, that was just mind blowing. But what was her name? There was the heel of the magazine. Her name was Brandy something. But it come to find out, like, years and years later when she retired, that it was actually one of the guys, I don't think it was Bill Apter. It was either Bill Apter or Stu Sachs was another one of the major guys on the magazine. I think he was behind her, like, whole persona, and there wasn't even this woman named Brandy, but I was just, because I'd read it for years, like Brandy, she hates all the good guys, and especially during the 90s when the NWO was a thing, she was like their biggest fan, and you like read a magazine so you think you know these people, and you come to find out she don't even exist. She's just a character some guy made up. It's just like, it was crazy to think, but the Apter mags, as they're called, the Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and there definitely a few. There one called The Wrestler. Oh my God, the first time I found the PWI Almanac, it was like that book. I had to get it every year. I had to get that thing. That it had all the results of every pay-per-view ever. I don't know if they can still put this out, but they had every pay-per-view ever, every champion history ever, and I would read this thing and study it, and I knew, like, I used to be able to tell you every champion, world champion, WWF and WCW there was from the time the title started up until the current time. I can't do it anymore. It's too many years and too many changes and everything. But yeah, that PWI Almanac completely, like, that was, I don't want to say my Bible, I don't want to be sacrilegious, but that was the way I treated it then. But definitely wrestling magazines changed my life, and like I said, I'm not proud of the way I accumulated them. Just stupidity, and I paid for it, trust me. But that's it for the podcast this week. Enjoyed it. We're at like an hour and 9 minutes, something like that. But next week we're going to jump into the future by 5.5 years. Episode 32 next week is going to be on October 1998, which of course means I'll be talking a lot about horror movies, because I'm sure a lot came out that year. What I did the last time I did October, I can't remember what episode, but I'll actually talk about every horror movie that I liked that came out the whole year. Kind of leave that, because it's October, kind of like the horror month. But and then I was 14 years old at the time, in 8th grade, in October. But anyway, that's episode number 32 next week. Last time we were in 1998 was back at episode 26. But anyway, next week, October 1998. Look for the bonus episode this week, and hopefully next month I don't have to do research and download music and pictures to put together for a Saturday morning cartoon thing. So next month, bonus episode, whenever I figure out when it's coming out, it should come out then, because all I gotta do is record that. It's just memories of my mom and dad. It's not something I have to research. These research ones take a lot of time, and like I said, the music and because I'm putting music and picture before I introduce each one, so I put it all together. It takes a little time with all the other stuff I got going on. But check out all my other videos. You never know what's going to be on here. Video game play-alongs, watch-alongs, reaction to Angry Grandpa. I'll put just random commercials on here from the 90s, karaoke videos, just whatever. Just look for that, and I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.
Tales from the 90s never die. In our hearts they testify. VCRs and mixtape spins, where every tale begins. Tales from the crypt, marathons, wrestling wars.